More than 250 experts in the traffic signals industry joined together in person to hear a range of papers here in Nottingham. These recordings are brought to you by AGD Systems, Colas, SRL Traffic Systems, Smart Video and Sensing, Vivacity and Unix Traffic.
Okay, so I guess it was a few months ago when I was thinking, should I put myself forward for a JCT paper presentation, not having done it for quite a number of years, to be honest. And it is as daunting as I thought it was going to be, standing down here after the time we've had over the last year or two. But and I thought, what topic can I go with? Traditionally, I've been down here talking about schemes that we've implemented in the past from my various lives in the traffic industry, or talking about product. I'm going to do something completely different today, in that actually I'm just going to pose a whole load of questions and a whole load of thoughts in my own mind about something that's actually bugging me a little bit. I feel a little bit guilty because there were speakers on this morning and there's speakers on after me that I might scupper slightly. So apologies in advance for that. I'll buy you a pint later. So if I can get the clicker to work. Oh, maybe I'm not using the right button. Obviously not using the right button. Okay, got it. As many of you will know, I basically was in the permanent traffic world for a long time. The temporary signals worlds have historically been very different, and moving from the permanent world to temporary world in January of this year, I've actually realised the divide is actually much bigger than I thought it was. Not only in the actual technology, but in the people. And the only times that I think the two technologies really come together is like in the exhibition area here. Other than that, it's two different worlds, really. And as I say, this paper really tries to talk about that divide, but I say that, like I say, I'm just going to raise a whole load of thoughts and ideas and perhaps questions and concerns that I've got. And I think it's going to be down to us and industry to sort the answers out here, really. I don't have all the answers, but as I say, between us, hopefully we can get this sorted. As I say, moved from the permanent traffic signal world, where I've been sort of 40 plus years, to the temporary world of January 1st this year. So very interesting, actually. There's probably things that I perhaps should have known about the temporary world, but I didn't until I got in at the deep end. And yeah, for me, I think it's great timing. Yeah, I'm a little bit older than perhaps some people think, so I'm not that far off retirement. So I'm going to glide my way into retirement, I think, in this role. As I say, as the world's moved towards this sort of connected and autonomous future, there's going to be a whole load of problems thrown up. I mean, I think a lot of them we know, a lot of discussions even this morning about how we get from the sort of trials and the early work that we're doing around some of these schemes to sort of the world of the future. There's a lot to do, but as I say, a nice challenge probably to end my career on. And maybe at the end of it, I can give up the steering wheel and the accelerator and just sit in my autonomous pod, maybe. Whilst in the past, the functionality of the early permanent traffic signals, and this is a bit of a history lesson, so apologies, but I'm conscious that some of you will know this very well, but maybe others new to the industry won't. Traffic signals at one point in time were very, very basic in their operation. There's still a lot of complexity in there, but really that was all around the safe operation of the signals. These early traffic controllers consisted really of relays to switch the signals on and off, and they were very basic, and it was actually, as a designer, which I was at the time, it was quite easy to design a traffic controller that was very safe, because the actual electronics and the way it was put together, you could actually look at all the failure modes that would occur, and you could obviously design those out. As time's gone on, that's not quite the way it is at the moment. Most of these early traffic control developments and the specifications focused on, as I say, the permanent world, and concentrating on how they should operate under all conditions. At the time, there was a little traffic control for roadworks. I think at worst, cars and pedestrians had to fend for themselves, and if you were really lucky, a couple of stop-and-go boards would turn up. We're talking quite a long time ago here, but that's the way it is. But just this lead in to, like I say, the differences between the two worlds. With the passing of time, the capabilities of the permanent traffic signals started to increase, and basically the hardware and software that was in there, we worked hard to make sure that actually provided safe controller situations under all circumstances. And as a part of that early sort of safety design, the failure modes could actually be considered and sorted out. But as I say, it was very complex in comparison to the way it had been, because you're actually dealing now with software and the complexities of software and making sure that your traffic controller worked under all conditions. As the temporary signals started to actually come into become commonplace, they still tended to be very limited in their functionality, very simple. We all probably remember the very early temporary traffic lights that turned up on the streets. But as I say, there was very little in the way of sharing of technology or crossover between those two worlds. And as time went on, we started to see what we consider probably the current generation of portable and temporary signals are starting to arrive on the streets, if you like. SRL, who I work for now, were probably one of the pioneers. I'm sure a lot of you in the audience will have some stories about the early days of SRL, which again we can talk over in the pub. But basically, SRL was very sort of early in terms of getting this technology on the street. So yeah, we used permanent traffic signal LEDs from partners at Danique, which was very different to a lot of the other signals that were out there at the time. And we're one of the first to introduce sort of radio linking of temporary traffic signals to actually simplify the actual installation, and get rid of the sort of trip hazards of the cables, etc. The divide. So, as I say, today there's still a very significant divide between the permanent world and temporary world. And as I say, that's, in my eyes, have been opened up to that, a lot in the last 6 months whilst I've been, 8 months while I've been working with SRL. Like I say, different products, different specifications, and different suppliers. And when the temporary and portable when the portable installations are actually deployed, they can often interfere with the permanent signals. I mean, I know there's going to be a lot of you in the room, but the last thing you want is for somebody to drop a set of temporary signals in the middle of your scoot region and really muck up the sort of timings and the way the traffic operates. But I think we just all see them as a necessary evil, really. And we just need to think about that in the future in terms of how we're going to go forward with that. But as I say, that's not the main message here. I've not quite got to that yet. There's some convergence of specifications. So some of you will know that there was a raft of specifications around haul route crossings, around temporary signals, and various other of temporary applications which have been pulled together into Topaz 2540, but there's still a massive difference or differential between Topaz 2540 and 2500, which is the permanent signal specification. And we need to really think about that as well, I think, going forward. If we're going to actually narrow this divide, which is the sort of mission that I've put myself on. So, as I say, there's some limited take-up and control and monitoring techniques from the permanent world into the temporary world, mainly through necessity, really, more than anything else. So some of you will be aware that we've got an Urban 64 product, which we call a semi-temporary scheme, where we actually put out a traffic controller onto a site in a semi-temporary basis, where there's large sort of works going on. Again, as I say, SRL pioneered the work here with that type of controller, and previous to that it was sort of poles in barrels, which came with all sorts of other complications. In some instances it worked, but if it's a major scheme, there was a lot of moving around of poles and barrels, cables trailing on the floor. So one of the things that Urban 64 does is actually get the cables catenaed across 7-metre high posts. So there's, again, it's probably an area there where the two worlds have started to come together, that divide has started to narrow. But those schemes allowed things like UTMC and Mover to be put on temporary signals for the first time, which were, I think, a bit of a godsend in a situation where you had a large scheme like that a complicated scheme, a lot of traffic running through it, and if you didn't have some of the capabilities and facilities of the sort of permanent world market, then you would have all sorts of problems at that site. So there's some work, as I say, going on there. Advanced detection systems have come in, so there's various ways of improving the performance of temporary traffic lights based around detection. As you're probably aware, the sort of default situation for temporary traffic lights is somebody sort of dials in sometimes onto the boxes at the side of the road. I think in the early boxes on the side of the road, it was almost dialed in number of paces between the stop line and the signals. It's a bit more sophisticated than that now. Yeah, so these advanced detection systems are actually, looking at how much traffic there is there and try and balance the traffic flow, or the way that it's operating to balance traffic flow. As I say, UTC and mover capability are becoming more and more available to the temporary world, so that's another thing that's sort of narrowing the divide and bringing more functionality to the temporary signals that are out there, and again, helping to reduce some of the congestion that these signals bring, particularly, like I say, when they're sat in the middle of an area of, a scoot region or something where the impact can be actually quite hard on the normal traffic flows. And we've all sat there and cursed at temporary traffic lights, even me, with the SRL badge on. Some schemes like HS2, so again, there's a lot of haul route crossings going in as part of the HS2 scheme. We're involved in a number of those at the moment, and our equipment is actually, being looked at to actually put in on their schemes. And there you've got things like your temporary traffic controllers, but you've also got barriers and various other elements, CCTV for monitoring of the actual site operation, but also for safety. So again, this is an area where technology from the permanent world is actually starting to be used in a temporary situation, but in a different sort of setup. So we just need to think again around how that works, or how that's going to work. Something we seriously need to consider is really the number of portable and temporary signals that are out there. I think one of the things is people think, well, yeah, there's not many out there, we don't see that many. By my guesstimation, there's at least 5,000 sets of signals out there. And the thing with signals is they move around, so that 5,000 probably gets multiplied by quite a big number in terms of where these signals sort of turn up and disappear from in a year. So, we need to take that into account. It's not like the temporary signals are an edge case, really, in terms of thinking about the future. Yeah, so I mentioned that really, as I say, I think something that really my eyes were opened up to is how many sort of temporary traffic signals are actually out there, having come from the permanent world. And I say this needs to be fully considered as a part of the connected, cooperative and autonomous vehicle strategy. Because we've talked this morning and we'll talk later today, I'm sure, about connected, cooperative and autonomous vehicles. But what do they know about temporary traffic lights? As I mentioned, are the temporary traffic lights a real edge case, which I think some people, promoting the sort of cooperative world would perhaps like to consider at the moment, because temporary traffic lights are going to be quite a difficult one to deal with. And some of the biggest challenges, I think, are when we get to a situation where we're actually dealing with temporary signals and these vehicles of the future. How do these vehicles know that they're there? Will the vehicle be able to deal with them reactively? Will the vehicle that you drive out, you drive an autonomous vehicle one morning and it's fine, you drive out, you drive the next morning and there's a set of temporary traffic lights there. How do we consider that? How do we deal with that going forward? Will one of these vehicles be happy to drive on the wrong side of the road because it thinks it's seen a single green light? Question. Perhaps all the deployments of portable traffic management and signals assets need to go onto some sort of live signals database, so that at least the cooperative systems that surround the cooperative vehicles can actually interrogate this database to say, I now know there's a set of temporary lights there and they're going to be there for this length of time, and how they might be operated, how they might be set up, because I think we've got to consider that going forward. Even VMS signs, the cars of the future need to read the VMS signs, I guess, or at least know what information's on there. It could be quite important information about speed or road closures or whatever. So again, something to add into the list of things that I think we need to consider before we get into the brave new world. We also need to be aware of different operating modes of temporary signals and how basically between the different suppliers they work differently in terms of the different setups for different configurations. They work differently. They're not necessarily consistent in the way that they operate. Some further thoughts. Oh, I've got a red light. Oh dear. Maybe we should consider some sort of beacon-type messaging from traffic signals, from temporary traffic signals to alert, to basically say I'm here on the temporary traffic signal, and this is what I'm the way I'm operating. There's some work going on with regard ARTSM Working Group 4, which I'm part of, to actually look into this. However, there's still likely to be a lack of predictability, really, and increased sort of use of intelligent detectors. So, I think it cropped up this morning, but how, autonomous vehicles going to deal with mover, for instance, that's going to basically not necessarily going to give out enough advance warning of the changes that are going to occur. I think the question was asked this morning, actually. So, again, something to consider. Nearly there, some pictures. Okay. So, what do we need to do? We need to advise these vehicles of the future of the presence of a mode of operation of temporary signals. As mentioned, these portable temporary signals could perhaps broadcast to say they're there. Maybe that's one way around it. Almost certainly, we ought to be looking at these things pushing out spat and glosa messages, to the vehicles of the future. And some joined-up thinking, I think, is sort of needed there. Some commonality is probably needed across the traffic control and monitoring of temporary and permanent worlds. As I say, some of that's happening. We need to push that even further, I think. When you consider the little vehicle there, is it on the pavement? Is it on the road? And what challenges would that bring? What are the benefits of narrowing the divide? I mean, hopefully this sort of encourages some joined-up thinking. That's what I'm trying to do here, just thought-provoking, really, in terms of areas that I think we need to look at and problems that I think we can see. We need to resolve these as we move forward. Question, how does this little guy push the button to cross the road? As I say, lots of challenges, lots of things that we need to think about as an industry and as a group of people. But maybe the answer's there for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. I think it's interesting for me. One of the first times I ever went out on site for work, I actually watched a concrete wagon drag a portable signal head off down the road because the cable mat got stuck underneath it. But I think it's interesting how, with the development of portables and temporary signals, what level of representation with the portable and temporary companies actually have with people like DFT? Do you have industry? Probably
not as much as we should. Yeah, and obviously I listened to Darren's paper this morning, and that was something that alerted me that we probably need to be talking a little bit more. As I say, I'm new to the temporary industry. I've been put in a role to look after the sort of the product and compliance and the strategy going forward. So it's certainly something that I'll be looking at and championing for sure. Yeah.
Brilliant. Right, question over here, please.
Thanks. Robert Mousel from Edinburgh. Thanks, Kevin. One thing which, you touched on your Urban 64, which is quite an involved installation and a bit of kit, but you kind of lose the benefits of the radio link and the flexibility of the portable ones. One thing I'm always looking at, especially when we have to switch off a junction and put temporaries in, maybe to do some works, is the lack of flexibility. You can't have arrows, walk with traffic, pedestrians, and so on. Is that something you see, sort of a convergence and maybe allowed to do those kind of things?
I think it's something we need to look at, isn't it? Yeah, again, like I say, being sort of relatively new to the industry, like probably most of us in the room, you sort of looked at portables and sort of that's the other side. That's not the bit I'm in. But the more I get involved in it, the more I think about it. You're right. Some of the facilities that ideally we need on the smaller sort of portable and temporary works, we need to consider how do we get them in there. I think specifications possibly hold that up a little bit, and I think the point around bringing together sort of the legacy specifications, some of the work going on with 2540 anyway, but thinking about how we get across from there to 2500 and how, well, as I say, it's going to be difficult, but it's something we need to look to do. And as I say, the big concern for me is, is these vehicles of the future that are actually not that much of the future now, because you can get in one on the road today that's telling you there's traffic lights ahead. So yeah.
Any more questions at all? Okay, well, we're slightly behind schedule, so...
Apologies for that.
No, it wasn't. So we'll call it there, and thank you.
Thank you.